The witch killer couple was seen kissing in court today, live in front of all Americans.
This is Jenn Carson, living a carefree life like any other child. But in 1979, everything changed when her parents' marriage fell apart and her father met a new woman, someone who would turn Jen's life into a nightmare.
You can fool your father, but I know you're the devil, and I'm going to get this demon out of you.
Jen's new stepmother and her father began heavily using psychedelic drugs. Over the years, they lost themselves in paranoia and delusion, convinced they had to hunt and kill witches.
They thought she could be the right hand of God.
Jenn hoped her father would come to his senses and save her from this nightmare, but she was wrong.
The victims, at least 14 people.
They claimed everyone they had killed were witches.
The couple labeled the San Francisco witch killer, saying they had a list of targeted celebrities and political figures, including President Ronald Reagan.
It was at that moment Jenn realized that she had lost her father forever.
Evil doesn't create. Good is creative, and evil is like a parasite or a leech.
Jenn was trapped in their dark, delusional world, struggling to survive, living in constant fear.
This is a horrifying space for any child.
The daughter of the witch killers now has no choice but to find a way to escape and fight back to ensure her father and stepmother will not kill anybody else ever again. June 12, 1982, a rescue team is sent to search for a group of hikers who disappeared in the woods near Alder Point, California. But before reaching their destination, they came face to face with two strange figures in the forest.
They were looking for a missing hiker, and all of a sudden, these two crazy-looking individuals dressed in rags with ratty hair start running around in different directions, screaming. Then one of the individuals in the rescue crew noticed that the weirdos had dropped a backpack.
The rescue team couldn't understand why the pair suddenly fled. However, it all became terrifyingly clear when they opened the backpack they'd left behind.
There was a gun, fake IDs, and this manifesto called A Cry for War.
It calls for nuclear war, targeted bombings, political assassination.
There was detailed plans to kill witches, and they had a list of the witches.
At the bottom of the list, consisting mostly of celebrities and public figures, a name stood out from the rest: Ronald Wilson Reagan. Since the witch killers were already suspected of being serial killers, and their next target was the President of the United States, the Secret Service got involved. They discovered that one of their main suspects, Michael Baer, left behind his young daughter and ex-wife before the killings began.
So in 1982, Men in Black literally showed up at our door, and I overheard some of it. I knew that Daddy was in trouble.
Knowing that the information would soon be relayed to the public, Jen's mother took it upon herself to deliver the devastating news to her young daughter.
I was just 8 turning 9 at the time, and she said, I told you that your daddy was really sick. And she said, unfortunately, he got much worse, and he hurt people. I immediately asked, are the hurt people dead? And she said yes.
Young Jenn struggled to process her mother's words. She had so many fond memories of her father from before the divorce. However, she couldn't ignore that everything took a turn for the worse after her dad married a strange woman named Suzanne Barnes.
When I think about my relationship with my father, I very much see it as before Susan and after Susan.
Who was Susan?
Back in the 60s, Suzanne Barnes, the daughter of a newspaper executive, lived the life of a wealthy socialite until she grew tired of her idyllic situation and began a double life.
Suzanne lived a privileged life. Her husband was rich. She would be what you would call, in a current term, a cougar. She said she made love with 150 of her son's classmates, just going through them one after another.
At first, she kept her interest in underage boys a secret, but when she began taking psychedelic drugs with her many teenage lovers, Suzanne's history of mental illness resurfaced.
The first time she took LSD, she woke up in the morning and the house was painted with triangles.
Suzanne was having visual hallucinations. This is a very, very serious symptom of schizophrenia.
The combination of mind-altering drugs and untreated mental illness proved to be a destructive mix, leading her husband to eventually discover her secret. He directly filed for divorce and gained custody of their 2 children. But Suzanne didn't care. She knew she wouldn't stay single for long.
One night, my father goes to a party, It was at the home of a wealthy divorcee. And so my father met this woman that was, 10 years his senior. She said, from now on, you'll be known as Michael. She then stated that she was psychic. She could see the past and the future, and that she saw that they were lovers in a past life.
My father had always been very interested in very radical religious beliefs, and those interests kind of became more and more extreme. It was like dropping through the rabbit hole.
The two immediately married and spent the entirety of Suzanne's life savings on hallucinogenic drugs. They then moved to California and turned their radical religious beliefs into a half-baked cult. Their first disciple was a 23-year-old woman named Karen Barnes, an up-and-coming actress from Georgia who had recently moved to Hollywood in the hopes of making it on the big screen.
She was kind of interested in that, kind of eclectic scene, and she was very much a bohemian girl.
When Suzanne and Michael came along and offered her their type of cult, she was fascinated by it.
From the outside, Michael and Suzanne's cult looked like any other hippie rambling of the era, but at its core reigned a dark idea. The couple was convinced that the world was actually ruled by witches. They believed that Suzanne, as the leader of the cult and their prophet, had the power to identify such witches, and that Michael, as her divine instrument, had to kill them.
Suzanne would have these visions, and she thought she was a witch. She thought she was going crazy. And Michael said, "No, dear, you're not having delusions. You're a prophet."
He was under her spell. He was at her command to kill whenever she ordered him.
As a young adult who just arrived in California, Karen Barnes was unlikely to know the extent of their delusions.
Living with people who are mentally ill and taking hallucinogenics is probably not the safest decision a person can make. They're probably a little bit paranoid. They think the world is dangerous, and with their grandiose ideas, it was up to them to clean up the world.
As it turns out, things escalated quickly for Karen. When Michael told Suzanne that he intended to take the 23-year-old as his second wife, she convinced him otherwise, with deadly consequences.
The trouble started when Michael became very attracted to this young disciple of theirs. Suzanne saw this as a threat, and she became incredibly jealous. Suzanne said, "We have to kill the witch. Michael, you have to kill Karen."
Immediately, Michael grabbed a knife and a frying pan from the kitchen. At his prophet's command, he attacked Karen while she was sleeping, stabbing and bludgeoning her face until she stopped moving.
No one should go through what she went through. She was a beautiful, delightful 23-year-old girl.
Following Karen Barnes' murder, the witch killers ran away north to hide on an illegal farm near the small town of Alder Point.
In 1982, Michael and Susan had been involved in an illegal marijuana farm in the northern part of California.
Susan is cultivating the marijuana, and my father is working security.
Months into their stay at the farm, a man named Clark Stevens joined the workforce. Clark was an outspoken and assertive surfer from Southern California who wasn't afraid to stand up to Suzanne and Michael.
It starts out as a difference of opinion about how to properly manicure plants, but it quickly escalates. Susan feels Stevens is disrespecting her.
In Suzanne and Michael's invented religion, disrespecting the prophet is enough to label you a witch, a title carrying a death sentence.
Some sort of argument occurred, and she realized that Clark Stevens was a witch and he had to be killed. So she ordered Michael to kill him.
Michael feared witchcraft. He saw witchcraft everywhere.
Without hesitation, Michael shot Clark Stevens in the head. He then proceeded to drench his body in gasoline, set it on fire, and buried what remained of him under the farm's manure supply.
Sometime later, there were some campers in the woods who their dog appeared to be playing with an object. And tragically, the dog was playing with the head of Clark Stevens.
The witch killers kept working on the farm for a few days as if nothing had happened. Since they were operating under false names, they knew the police couldn't locate them, even after finding the body.
When the police searched for suspects under the name Susan and Michael Barrett, they came up empty because that was a false name.
But all of this changed after the rescue team discovered the witch killers' manifesto. Although they had no proof, the police and the Secret Service were finally starting to put the puzzle together. The murders of Karen Barnes, Clark Stevens and 11 other individuals did not only fit the MO of Suzanne and Michael, the manifesto itself mentioned some of the victims by name. Fearing for her daughter's life, Jenn's mother took her into hiding and severed all contact with Michael and Suzanne. As Jenn packed up, she reminisced about the time she had to live with her father and Suzanne following her parents' divorce.
The first time I recall going to Susan's house, it was absolutely terrifying. So we got to the house and it was night. They opened the door and there was a bunch of potted trees. In my mind, it looked similar to the forest from The Wizard of Oz.
And so here I am, a young child, and I'm walking into this dark, like haunted forest with a woman who, to me, looked like a Disney villain.
Alone in Suzanne's house, young Jenn is left to fend for herself while her supposed caretakers are lost in a drug-fueled fantasy world.
She's making strange concoctions of food with barley and marijuana and LSD. And I remember attempting to find food because they were passed out naked. And I remember attempting to escape from the home, picking up a corded telephone. I dialed 0 and saying to the telephone operator, "I want mommy."
With her father under the influence of Suzanne's hallucinogenic food, there wasn't anyone to protect the little girl from her sadistic stepmother. She was convinced Jenn was either a witch or a demon and abused her both physically and mentally in an attempt to, as she put it, exorcise her.
She did horrifically abuse me. I have had lifelong flashes of her dunking me underwater, and there was an incident where she scratched open my back and there were 5 nail marks that looked like a werewolf had come at me. But more frightening to me than the injury was what she was saying. You know, you can fool your father, but I know you're the devil, and I'm going to get this demon out of you.
When Jenn's mother discovered how her daughter was being mistreated, she disregarded the court order that kept Jenn with her father and took her away. For 3 years, they stayed hidden. But with the return of the witch killers to Los Angeles, Jenn's mother knew that trouble would follow.
At this point, she was absolutely convinced that they would kidnap me. They called my mom and they said, "We're picking up Jenny." And they said, "We're going to be there in an hour."
Unaware that Secret Service agents are hot on their trail, the witch killers hit the road to return to the city, less than 30 miles from where Jenn and her mother were hiding. Hitchhiking along the way, they were picked up by a friendly man named John Hellier.
They were in a truck where there was just the single bucket seat. 2 people ride comfortably in a pickup truck, but 3 it's tight. And according to Michael and Susan, John's leg was touching Susan's leg.
In the witch killer's religion, if insulting the prophet gets you a death sentence, touching her might as well end up in public execution.
And she decides that Hillier is a witch and that he needs to die.
Michael instantly grabbed his gun and aimed it at John. But for the first time, the person they marked for death had a chance to fight back.
The truck came to a stop, and witnesses observed a scuffle between Michael Carson and John Helliard. Eventually, Michael Carson gained control of a pistol.
Hillier grabs the gun, and now they're fighting over the pistol. Suzanne's screaming, "Kill him, kill him, kill him."
After struggling for the gun for over 10 minutes, John seemed to get the upper hand on Michael, but Suzanne produced a knife and started violently stabbing him. Bleeding and in pain, the 30-year-old let go of the gun long enough for Michael to push him back. He then shot John in the head twice, while Suzanne held him to his knees. Surrounded by dozens of terrified onlookers, gasping for air and covered in blood, the witch killers immediately escaped the scene.
Michael and Susan get back into the truck and they drive off. The police eventually spot their truck. There's a high-speed chase.
It seals their fate, basically. There's no question that they are traveling murderers.
After crashing into a ditch and exchanging gunfire with the police, the couple attempted to run away on foot. Police tracked them up to a river where Suzanne and Michael were finally arrested. Detective Frank Falzone already suspected the crazed hippies of the murders of Karen Barnes and Clark Stevens, but at this time, he had no idea what their true identities were.
My partner and I immediately went to Sonoma County to interview the Carsons. Susan says, "No way. You want a statement from us? We want the big city news to be here. We want to be filmed, and we want it in the newspaper." I said, "I can arrange that." They wanted the world to know their insane, ludicrous religion, their beliefs. They thought they could end up with a flock of disciples and that she could be the right hand of God.
Before the trial even began, the witch killers requested that the police hold a massive press conference. In exchange for national television coverage, they agreed to divulge 2 more of their victims, Karen Barnes and Clark Stevens. When the press conference aired, Jenn learned more than she was prepared to handle at 9 years old.
Speak the truth.
Evil doesn't create. Good is creative, and evil is like a parasite or a leech that it can't create, but it can only copy. That's why powerful evil people are always attracted to Suzanne.
I know that voice, but those things he's saying are just so bizarre and disturbing.
With the trial being on everyone's lips, it was hard for young Jenn to ignore what was happening. She learned that, although the number of victims was estimated to be over 14, the court chose to only press charges on the 3 murders they both admitted to. During the hearings, the witch killers put mystics, fortune tellers, and spiritual healers on the bench, giving the procedure a strange aura of New Age quackery.
The Carsons ramble and rant about all sorts of things, from 1984 and George Orwell to Ronald Reagan being the devil to why witches need to be killed.
In their defense, they were stating that they only became violent in self-defense because they had been attacked psychically by these individuals. Suzanne got up and screamed, "What is my crime? To be beautiful, to be an artist?" It was a zoo.
But the veil of mysticism was quickly lifted once the coroner entered the courtroom. From the pictures of Karen Barnes' face to the terrifying testimonies of the dozens of people who witnessed John Hellier's murder, the entire state of California was left speechless.
The couple, labeled the San Francisco Witch Killers, Michael Bear Carson and his second wife Susan, smiling as the camera rolled. Daughter Jenn calls him evil. They were later convicted of 3 murders and sentenced to 75 years to life in prison.
9-year-old Jenn felt betrayed and overwhelmed, suddenly realizing the danger she'd been in during the past few years.
When I realized that the hands that changed my diapers killed these people, I thought, if Daddy could kill, anyone could kill. I became very frightened. I started sleeping with knives and scissors under my pillow.
With the witch killers finally behind bars, Jenn's mother turned the page in relief. But her young daughter still had a major concern. If her father could do such terrible things, what might she be capable of?
I went into a really, really severe depression. It completely changed who I was, how I thought about myself, that eventually I would hurt someone. Maybe I would kill someone. I remember thinking, I have monster DNA.
And you still loved him.
And I still loved him. Yeah.
But Jenn's unconditional love slowly faded away, especially after her father started sending her disturbing letters from jail.
That kind of freaked me out. I know that the hand that's writing these letters had bludgeoned and decapitated people. It was just so disturbing to me.
Believing his evil had taken hold of her, leaving her broken and helpless, she felt forced to play along when others around her lied about her past.
It was so vital for me to keep this a secret. I had a long-term boyfriend who took me home to meet his parents on Thanksgiving, and as we're walking up to their door, he says, "I hope you don't mind. I told them that your father died in a car accident."
Even as an adult, depression and chronic nightmares continued to plague Jenn's personal and professional life. After almost falling asleep in the middle of a class she was teaching, she finally had enough and decided to take back control of her life.
I can't do this anymore. I have to do something. I made the decision to go see him in person.
Visualizing her encounter with Michael as a scene from a movie, Jenn thought she would be protected behind glass and talking to her father through a mounted receiver. Little did she know, none of this would happen as she had imagined.
And so this sliding door opened, and I'm in this open room. There's no glass, there's no receivers, and my father is hugging me. I'm just shocked and I'm stunned, and I just am just frozen like a statue.
For over 3 agonizing hours, Michael rambled about his obsession with witches. At this point, the witch killer had been incarcerated for almost 15 years, and Jenn suddenly realized that, for her father, it was almost as if not a day had passed. She eventually stopped him dead in his tracks and asked him about the murders.
She's looking for the truth. She's looking for answers. She's looking for something that will enable her to close that chapter in her life. Some explanation, some remorse, something, some truth. He doesn't give this to her.
On the contrary, Jenn finally realized that the answers had been within her all along. She might have known James Carson her whole life, but now, for the first time, she met Michael Baer, the witch killer. She could stand up to him if she chose to. He no longer had power over her.
I think what she's recognized as she's got older and integrated those experiences is that the dad that she remembers as a child actually never really existed.
You know, that's Michael Baer Carson, and he is a pathetic creature, and he's like a rat in a cage. He's going to die in that prison.
Jenn was finally free of her father's influence, or so she thought. Due to prison system reforms, Michael and Suzanne's sentence of 75 years to life was overturned. Instead, from 2014 onward, the witch killers could be eligible for parole every 5 years.
You absolutely can't have rehabilitation when there is absolutely no remorse. And so I chose to pursue fighting his parole.
Jenn's newfound freedom was short-lived. With Michael and Suzanne up for parole, she now faced a new battle, keeping them behind bars.
Tomorrow, Michael Carson will have a parole hearing.
Michael Carson's daughter lives in Riverside. She will speak out against his release. In fact, she told me he's a predator who will kill again.
Jenn was shocked to learn she had been the only person asked to testify at the hearing, determined to not only stop her father, but also to ensure that the victims were properly represented. She sought out the families of John Hellier, Clark Stevens, and Karen Barnes.
Why do you want to meet the family members of the people your father killed?
I found out that the parole board had not notified the Hillier family, nor had made any attempt to find them. And so that's when I sent them a message, because they have a right to know. Of course, wanted to tell you I'm so sorry you lost your brother, and you lost him so violently, and that you don't have him here with you.
Thank you for that. Appreciate that.
Jenn spent years hoping that she could undo all of the horrors her father brought into the world. She thought this was her chance, but each of the family members of her father's victims told her the same thing. It wasn't your fault.
In the past, I was trying to atone for my father's crimes, and now I know I cannot bring back his victims. I can't pay this debt. It's not my debt. I remain the daughter of a serial killer, but I no longer believe I'm the bad seed. I no longer hide. I no longer keep it a secret. There is a almost contentment or peace that I found that I can find something good that comes from this horrific experience.
I began a petition campaign and a media campaign against their parole. You know, Karen Barnes' family, Clark Stevens' family, John Hellier's family. These are incredibly good, kind people.
Together, the Helliers, Stevens, and Barnes testified at the parole hearing, spearheaded by Jenn's own account of her father's horrific crimes. And, against all odds, they finally won. Jenn will never again exist in her father's shadow. She is free now, no longer burdened with the guilt of a violent past that was never hers to carry. Today, Jenn uses her own experience to shine a light on mental illness and trauma. She's now a doctor of social work specializing in helping children of violent criminals. No matter your background and what might have happened to you, she is convinced there is always a way out of the dark.
Complex grief, depression, school failure, substance abuse. And you know what? I'm really open. I am mentally ill. I have a mental illness, everybody. Is that scaring you? It shouldn't. When we get to a place where we can talk about that, then we can move forward, because you know what? I am not ashamed of being mentally ill. I didn't put that stigma on me. Somebody else put that stigma on me. It isn't easy, but if you seek help and you're gentle with yourself, it gets better. And so I feel very optimistic about being able to use my experience in some way to help others.